A gunman in Nigeria's northwestern Niger State attacked a government school earlier this week, reportedly abducting hundreds of students and teachers and killing one student. Kidnappers in the West African country once targeted people with money for power, but increasingly they are abducting people with neither, like school children. For more on this, I'm joined by Anieche Ewang from Human Rights Watch. Anieche, pleasure to have you on the program this afternoon. Now, killings, sexual violence and even mass kidnappings for ransom have risen sharply, including on schools. What can you tell us about the frequency and also the ease in which armed groups have staged attacks in northwest Nigeria?
Thank you very much for having me. I think that the frequency, as you noted, is something that many Nigerians are quite concerned about. In the last couple of years, there's been a rise in these sort of attacks in Nigeria's northwest and north central regions. They've been plagued by incessant security challenges from gangs of bandits who are pillaging, extorting, and kidnapping for ransom in the mostly rural areas. Now, most of these parts are places before now that, and even now, continue to deal with deep levels of poverty, not a lot of access to education to start with, and a lack of, government presence to really provide the sort of basic infrastructure and necessities that many citizens need to thrive. With the absence of that sort of, citizens' engagement into the right channels for them to have, livelihoods, you find these ungoverned spaces more and more being taken over by armed groups, and the Nigerian security forces just struggling and failing largely to respond to the continued threat.
Let's expand on that last point. Now, the lack of rural security and protection offered by a vast and mineral-rich forest has also provided the conditions for armed groups to thrive. It's also reported that some local governments have signed controversial and obscure peace deals with groups, with some even admitting to having paid or offered assistance to these insurgents. But yet attacks have remained quite a commonplace in that country.
Yeah, Nigeria's security forces are stretched. In the Northeast, there's an ongoing conflict. It's been there for over 10 years, and there is no signs of it wavering. And now you have these attacks from bandits who may or may not be connected to the insurgency groups, the well-established insurgency groups in the Northeast. And the responses from the authorities have left many people asking for much more. There's a complete lack of an early warning system, any sort of, communication infrastructure that's set up for citizens to be able to alert the authorities in the event that there is an ongoing attack or they get news of an impending attack. So when you have this sort of situation where the government has completely failed, you find people really looking for solutions, however inadequate or inefficient or problematic they may be, just because they want a semblance of peace and security in their communities. Of course, there are arguments that this sort of arrangement where bandits are paid off ransom to be able to release kidnappers or ward off more attacks only strengthens them, gives them access to more resources to be able to channel that into buying more weapons, or making their operations more sophisticated to carry on with this sort of attacks and this sort of behavior. Essentially, it is where there is a lack of security presence and just a failure of the authorities to figure out a strategy that really takes into consideration the problems that they're now having.
Let's expand a bit about government's response. So the Nigerian President Muhammadu Buhari is increasingly being vilified for this rising insecurity. And this has also forced him to recently replace all the armed forces chiefs. Talk us through your assessment of the government's response to the situation.
I think that right from early on in President Buhari's administration, when he made those promises to ensure that we have a safer society, he had the support of citizens who voted him in. And increasingly, in the face of more attacks, after some initial progress was made, especially in the Northeast, in combating the insurgency in the Northeast, we saw a complete downward spiral. And since then, a lot of his responses have left citizens again asking questions. We've seen the claim from the government that Boko Haram has been completely disseminated and are on the back foot. Well, more and more reports show every day that that is not true. So there's really these questions about, the authenticity of the government's responses and whether or not they're actually taking steps to inform citizens, both of the progress and some of the problems that make it impossible to make progress. There is a sense that it's only when the government is clear, is only when they make these things known and that they can actually start to address them with support from citizens or support from the international community. But as long as they keep with the same rhetoric that they're on top of the situation, when we clearly see many of the challenges, then there's a sense that his administration has completely lost the trust of the citizens on this particular issue.
Yeah. So the president has since directed the armed forces and police to ensure immediate and safe return of all the captives. Are there any developments on this front?
Nothing yet. We're still waiting for the authorities to keep us informed of the next steps. There has been rumors of meetings with some of these kidnappers and religious leaders or other community leaders in the Northwest. We're not yet sure where this will take us. And of course, many of them have come with criticisms from the larger citizenry asking why there is even an option to have these sort of meetings or these sort of negotiations or these sort of engagements with people who the authorities should be clamping down seriously on.
Now, before I let you go, I also want to touch on one last aspect. In recent years, attacks have also increased over Nigeria's porous border with Niger, with refugees fleeing further and further into the country. What can you tell us about that situation?
We have a really dwindling situation in that part of the country, especially on the fringes of the border, where we know that Boko Haram has really started to operate and have their wrath felt against citizens. It is not yet clear whether or not these refugees that will be sent back to Nigeria are doing so or coming back home willingly. Of course, you know that international standards require that any sort of returns are done willingly and without any sort of force. It is not yet clear whether these things have been adhered to by the authorities, both on the Nigerian side or on the Niger side. And if these refugees are being given all of the support, psychosocial support, livelihood support that they should get in such a situation where their lives have completely been torn apart. But it is an issue that we're monitoring. We'll probably have more on that as it unfolds.
Well, that was Anyeche Enwang from Human Rights Watch, the Nigeria division, just giving us an update there on the spate of kidnappings in that region. Who can forget that shocking story that sent shockwaves through the world of those abducted Chibok girls, some of which have returned to their homes.